Life on the Russia-Ukraine front line. What's up, guys? I want to talk about how life was on the front line, but before that, two things I want to cover. First off, I am so grateful for the amount of love we've been getting in the comments. The fact that any of you guys are getting value and enjoying this content of me explaining my experiences and opinions about the Ukraine and Russia conflict, it blows my mind. I'm so grateful. So thank you guys. Keep sharing, subscribing. I love you guys. Thank you. Second thing is I keep getting questions, comments and DMs about if I think you should go join the International Legion and being a foreign fighter. I want to say it now rather than reply to each comment, just so it's across the board. I do not think that you should. I think statistically it's a bad idea. I think statistically if you go, you won't come home, or you will, but you'll be severely injured. And selfishly, I cannot recommend that you do go, because if I found out one of you guys went and got hurt, it would eat me alive, man. I would not be able to live with myself. That'd feel terrible. But there is a small percentage of people who are gonna go regardless of the numbers, the statistics, or what anybody says. So I just wanna make sure that you, if you are considering this, if you are one of this small percentage, that you know what to expect, so you're not going in blind and you have some idea of what's going on. Also, there's only a handful of foreign fighters making content on their experience out there. And the entire community of actual foreign fighters is very small. Most people know each other. So I think hearing some of these experiences could be valuable to the people who are actually interested in the conflict that's going on out there. Okay, that's it. Let's jump into it. Let's talk about life on the front line. I want to give a little disclaimer here. I'm going to be as transparent as I possibly can be about how things really are out there on the front line, because I was very shocked when I got out there. It was not what I expected. Things were different, and I don't want to hold anything back, even if I get in a little bit of trouble for saying some of these things. I think you guys need to know this if you do end up going out there. And I'll cover more of what I'm referring to a little bit later in this video. I don't want to start off with this. So if you watched the last video, we ended off with training experience, about 7 to 8 weeks of basic combat training, and then you are deployed to the front line wherever they need you, wherever the Ukrainian Armed Forces needs you. It's about a 2-day bus ride with all the boys and girls. There are some girls in the Legion. 2-day bus ride from your training base to the front line on the east side of Ukraine. Now, during the training phase, this whole time you're told prepare to choose between Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie platoons. Now, there's different pros and cons to each platoon. For example, in my battalion, the Alpha platoon was largely, or at least we were told at the time, it was largely Spanish speakers. So you had a lot of Colombians, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans. So some of the guys who was training with me, like my buddy Carlos, I should have a picture of him here. He's one of my best buddies. He was considering joining Alpha once we deployed because he speaks fluent Spanish. We also heard that Charlie platoon was mostly Brits and Americans, pure English speakers. So when we were in training, me, Tex, Shaka, some of the English speakers knew right out of the gate, hey, we're gonna join Charlie, because you need to have that communication on point, right, when you're on the front. Which actually reminds me, I wanted to mention this comment that we got on my last video about language barriers here. It's such a good question. So this is how you kind of mitigate some of the language barrier issues. Pick the proper platoon with the majority of the language speakers that you speak. Does that make sense? So like I said, Charlie was mostly English. I went Charlie. Aside from that, I would absolutely recommend you brush up on Ukrainian, just very basic Ukrainian words. A lot of us guys use this app Duolingo, not sponsored, but I'll throw it here because I think it's important. I'll also link it in the description. A lot of us use Duolingo because it helped us learn the basics of Ukrainian. And the reason you need to know some Ukrainian is because when you actually go out on missions, you've already gotten to the front, you go out on missions, you're always attached to a Ukrainian unit, whether it's an infantry brigade, a mechanized infantry brigade, an armored brigade. You'll always be a part of a Ukrainian unit. 3 to 4 legionnaires will go out with a Ukrainian unit, which is typically, 20 to 30 soldiers. Very important to know, join the platoon that has the most people speaking your language, and also brush up on your Ukrainian. It's not required to know fluent Ukrainian, but it is absolutely helpful to at least know your basics. Okay, sorry, kind of went off on a tangent there, but I wanted to address that comment before I forgot. So again, we finished training, 2-day bus ride to the east side where the front is. But before you get to the front, you go to basically the main military headquarters, which is on the east side, right? I'm not going to share exactly where that's at, obviously, for their security, but it's a big underground bunker, and I mean, it's like tunnels and tunnels. It's really cool. It's like a beehive underground. I hadn't seen nothing like it before. But you get there, you go down, you get issued your gear for the front. And I was there in winter, so I got stuff like a sleeping mat, a sleeping bag, big heavy jackets. I got snow pants, camo snow pants. You also get issued your rifle there, which depends on which platoon that you chose. Like, for example, I was Charlie, so we had the AK-74s. Most of the guys in Alpha were running with some kind of an AR platform, and Bravo had AR platforms as well, I believe. So you get to this big bunker on the east side, you get issued all your gear, you're basically hanging out down there with all your guys and some guys from other units and stuff are there. This is like a main Ukrainian armed forces base underground. So there's a lot going on there, a lot of different units. So you get issued all your stuff, and then you wait for the commander of whichever platoon you chose. So I waited for my commander, who was Dentist, and I can share his info, and I'll tell you why in a bit. But Dentist came, he picked us up, we headed out to what are called our safe houses, which was our village, 10 kilometers from the front line where we were stationed. Bravo's platoon commander came, picked up all the boys in Bravo. Alpha's platoon commander came, picked up all the boys for Alpha. So a lot of us who split off into different platoons, we said goodbye. You've been training with these guys for the last 8 weeks. So, it's all hugs and high fives and stuff. And hey, I love you, be safe. We'll catch up on the other side. And say bye to anybody who's going to, in my case, if they were going to Alpha or Bravo, I said bye to those guys. Me and the Charlie boys went with Dentist to the east. Now, again, a little side note, I mentioned Dentist was our platoon commander. Dentist was the shorter, skinny Sri Lankan guy and just had an incredible reputation in the Legion. That's another reason a lot of us chose to go Charlie, because we had heard about Dentist. We knew he was a badass. We knew he took care of his guys, and so we chose him. Of course, the first time a lot of us met him was when he came to pick us up at the base. Once we all piled into the vans, we piled into 2 separate vans, and we headed out to, like I said, our position, which was 10, which is a abandoned Ukrainian village that we had taken over, and we were using for our basically base of operations 10 kilometers away from the front line. In these vans, when we were driving out there, is the moment when I had my second, oh shit, what am I doing moment. We're driving out of the city where the main base is, and we're heading towards the front line, and we're going through all the blockades, right? We're passing signs saying, you're entering danger zone, go back. We're passing these signs and stuff. And I'm thinking, and it's nighttime, it's dark. And at one point we have to turn off your headlights, right? Because you don't want to be seen by enemy drones or tracked by enemy drones back to our safe house, our village. So it's pitch black. Me and all the boys are in the van. And I think everybody was having the same thought. We're all like, it was just quiet. You could hear a pin drop, and we're all sitting there, and I'm just thinking, okay, this is happening. We are on the front. We're on the front line. And there's absolutely this fear, right? But I will say it is not an overwhelming sense of fear. And for me, it was because I was with these guys who I had combat trained with for the last 7 to 8 weeks. I trusted these guys. These guys trusted me. And probably to a detriment, you almost feel invincible. You've been waiting to deploy with you and your boys have been waiting to deploy for weeks. Now it's happening. So you're more stoked than you are scared. But that was definitely a moment where I was like, this is getting real, man. We're almost there. We arrived to the village. Again, it's in the middle of the night, and the boys in Charlie platoon are already outside. They're waiting for us, and we hop out, and some of the people in Charlie who are already out there are calling our names out. And so we were staying in their houses that were in the village. So I got called out by Cole and Kyle were their names. They called me, and I was like, yeah, that's me. They're like, okay, you're in our house. So I was in a house with Cole and Kyle. Like I said, one's a medic and one was the second IC, second in command. They opted to have me in that house because Kyle was the only medic in Charlie at the time, and I was the second medic coming in. Kyle was going to be training me, so it was just better to have us close. But unfortunately, I didn't end up going with any of my boys. Again, we're all in the same village, but I didn't get to be in a house with them. And when you spend the last 8 weeks with these guys shoulder to shoulder in bunk beds, being separated like that was it kind of hurt, you know. I was like, damn it, I want to be with the guys. But that was still cool. Cole and Kyle were cool. I mean, they had been there for months already before I had even arrived. These guys were hardened badasses already. They were both Canadians. One was younger than me, one was a little bit older than me. I believe both had prior military experience in Canada, and they were badasses. There's nothing else to it. So we get into my new house with Cole and Kyle, and they kind of show me around. You know, it's an abandoned Ukrainian house. There's no power. There's no electricity. There's no heat. There's no plumbing. So it's almost like camping in a way. You know, they're like, hey, if you got to go to the bathroom, there's an outhouse out in the back. Here's the fireplace. We use this for heat because obviously, again, it was the middle of winter in Eastern Europe. Cold as shit. And then this little doggy, I believe it was a little baby German Shepherd, come running out. And they're like, oh yeah, and this is Dishka. And I was like, Dishka? And he's like, yeah, we got this little puppy. He was abandoned or something on the front. They found him. They brought him back. And I'm sure I have pictures of him right here, but it's so freaking cute. So they show me my bed. Me, Cole, and Kyle all slept in the same room in our own beds. And Dishka curled up with me, and I was out for the night. I was like, okay, we're here. We're on the front. I was probably asleep for maybe 30, 45 minutes at this time. Cole and Kyle are both knocked out. And I just feel it. And it was a little freaking mouse running over my face, dude. And then he crawled into my sleeping bag. But since I had been in that gnarly barracks at the Ukrainian training base for the last 2 months, it didn't even panic me. I was like, all right, I guess we're sleeping together now. I don't know. I'm not going to, freak out, throw Dishka off the bed, throw the dog. You know, I was like, all right, now I got the dog and the mouse, whatever. That was my first night in our village. Like I said, that is 10 kilometers from the front, our base of operations. In the following days and weeks, basically we would train, we'd go out and do weapons training with our rifles. We had bigger ordnance that we would fire. We also did some advanced medical training with some of the Ukrainian medics. We'd meet up with them. They would give us some cool tips and tricks and what to do. Of course, practicing tourniquets. The number one cause of death out there is massive bleeds. So they harp on tourniquet, everything. At one point in our training, we would have one of the commanders would just throw a tourniquet at you and then start timing. And if he throws a tourniquet at you, you got to put it on as fast as you can. He'll tell you arm or right arm, left leg. And then you got to put it on as fast as you can. He'll stop the timer once you got it tight. You know, so they're always harping on learn how to get a tourniquet on and tie it until you start screaming. You know, it's always tie it until you are screaming and then twist it 2 more times. You want that shit numb. Probably my favorite part about the front line, right, is the fact that we had a Ukrainian that was attached to our unit who cooked for us. And he just made the best meals. Like, if you watched my last video or a couple videos ago, I explained how shit the food was in the training base. Again, grateful I had the nourishment and the food at the time, but having some real home cook like stews and, pork and potatoes, and this guy was just a beast chef, big old fucking Ukrainian dude, and he made great food. So we were all just like, because we've been eating buckwheat and hot dogs for the last 8 weeks. After about a week of being there, getting accustomed to things, they started rotating us out into the missions. Missions basically consisted of us going out, attaching with a Ukrainian unit. Like I said, I'm not going to say exactly who we were attached to, but we were attached to an infantry unit at the time. We'd go out to a trench line, and we would hold the position for anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, then we'd exfil. That was it. We weren't going on assaults or anything. We were holding trench lines. It wasn't anything great and glorious, but it's something that is absolutely imperative to do in a conflict like this. While I was out there, I only went on a few missions, and I'll explain why in a minute. But my first mission, again, crazy as shit. I've never been in combat. I'm an EMT firefighter from Texas, right? This was crazy to me. So we show up, we meet up with the Ukrainian unit. They say, okay, here's your ride out to the trench line. And it was a BMP, a big armored personnel carrier. I'm like, okay, do we get in or how's this work? They're like, no, just crawl on top. So there's there's at least 20 people on top of this BMP, also a bunch of people shoved in the back. I'm on top, everybody's holding on to each other like this, right? So you're not falling off. Again, it's the middle of the night, it's cold. The sky looks like something out of Star Wars. Tracer rounds, rockets, artillery, blues, reds, greens, flares. It was incredible. And this BMP just hauls ass out to the front line. Pitch black, Star Wars sky. It was an experience, right? Again, number 3, oh shit moment. I'm like, oh my God, we're driving into enemy fire. What am I doing with my life? Since it's the middle of winter, this BMP is having to go through this nasty ice and mud combination. So some parts were hard packed and some parts were super mushy. So he's trying to haul ass so we don't get stuck, because a lot of their vehicles have been getting stuck out there in this mud. And I start to fall off of the BMP, and one of the Ukrainians grabbed me, but he grabs my Baofeng, which is my radio that I needed to keep in touch with the other 3 Legionnaires who were with me. And he grabbed my Baofeng and pulled it off, and I didn't realize at the time, because this guy saved me from falling off. He grabbed me, but it ripped my Baofeng off, and I lost it, which is like $1,000 radio. And then we arrive and they say, okay, now we got a 2-kilometer hike, which all of us thought it was more like 7 because of how gnarly these infills were. But they're like, we can't go any further because it'll get stuck. So now we hike to the trench position. So again, light discipline, we are meters away from Russian lines. So light discipline, we're trying to follow right behind each other. There's also mines everywhere. So you're trying to follow exactly where the guy in front of you is. So again, it's me, 3 other Legionnaires, so four Legionnaires total, and then about 20 to 30 Ukrainian soldiers from an infantry brigade. I mentioned this in my past videos, but I was out of shape. I should have been in better shape. That was a mistake that I made when I went there. And these infills killed me. The mixture between not being able to see shit, the mud, the ice, the big craters from, the different ordnance, I was falling and slipping and getting stuck, and I was exhausted. I was so freaking tired. There were times while we're infilling where we would get some pretty danger close artillery shells, and I was so tired, I was like, if it's my time, it's my time, but I'm not even taking to cover, which is bad. And I know that it's bad, but that's what I'm saying. It's imperative. Make sure you're in good shape. Go on jogs, go on runs, any of that before you go. At the same time, you're hiking through all this stuff. You've got your plate carrier on, you've got your backpack with 2 days worth of water and food, you've got either a rocket launcher or a 40 mic on you, you've got your actual rifle, plus a backpack full of ammunition and grenades. You're heavy as shit, and you're trying to hurry through this mud and ice stuff. Man, I just was not prepared. But these Ukrainians, dude, are monsters. They're straight beasts. I don't know if it's because they grew up in this environment and I didn't, but they were like mountain goats. They're just across this terrain like it's nothing, dude. I was blown away. Ukrainians kept coming up behind me. They're like, American, Dubai. I'm like, I'm coming, dude. But eventually you get to your position. Now, this is when we arrived on the position, I realized that the other Legionnaire who had the other radio, we had 2 radios for 4 of us. We were supposed to stay in 2s. He lost his on the ride in too. That's how bumpy it was. So neither of us had our Baofeng radios, and we were split up on the line. I ended up with one of the commanders named Quiet. That was his call sign. And then the other 3 guys were down the other way too, all separated. So we were split up all across the front in this trench line. Again, I was with one of the commanders named Quiet, and him and I shared a trench. 3 hours, I'd be in there sleeping or, on my phone or playing a game or whatever. I know it sounds crazy, and then he spends 3 hours on watch, and then we switch. 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours. Anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, depending on that duration of that mission. The nighttime was fucking cold, man. I'd never been cold like that. The worst part is you get so sweaty and hot on the infill in. You've got all these layers on, you're preparing for 48 hours in a dirt hole. So you're layered up, you're ready for the cold. You go on this marathon hike, you're sweaty as shit, and then you got to sit there for 24 hours in the ice cold weather. So it just, that sweat gets cold on you. It's hard to stay warm, at least in the nighttime. The night was long and it was cold. So on my watch shifts, when Quiet would go in and try to get some sleep into our foxhole, I would come out and we would have a thermal and or a night vision scope, either binoculars or a monocular, and you would just basically peer across the front line and make sure nobody's pushing. Almost all the trench lines that are either the Russians made or the Ukrainians are in what's called these posatkas, and I'll try to put a picture right here, but they're basically, it's all this farmland divided into a grid, divided in these big squares of land, and it's the borders of these squares of flat land, these squares of farmland, it's the borders. It's like the tree lines in between these farmlands. That's where a lot of these trench lines were made. So it would be a trench line in one posadka, farmland, and then the other posadka. So when you're on watch and you're looking through your thermal or your night vision, you're just looking across this empty farmland, which is just filled with everything, mines, bodies, barbed wire, everything. And you just make sure Russians aren't pushing you, basically. While you're out there holding the trench, it's constant enemy artillery, indirect fire. It's artillery, mortars, drones the entire time. It's boom, boom, some close, some far. Some close enough to shake your foxhole and throw dirt on you, and some far away. But if it's far away from you, you know it's close to somebody. On my first mission, there was a round that landed directly in the foxhole where 2 Ukrainian soldiers were. Both were dead instantly. It was basically just like that, taking shifts on and off, sitting in your trench, praying that the next round doesn't land in your foxhole, and then you exfil out in that same shitty path all the way back to the BMP that picks you up. You go back to the safe house or the safe village, right? It's exhausting, it's cold, it's dirty, but it's the life of an infantryman, at least out there in Ukraine. When you come back to your village, you've got 24 hours off, basically meaning you don't have any duties. You don't have any trainings that you have to go do. You don't have any, you don't have to go clean the bathrooms or do dishes that day or whatever your duties, your little section's duties would have been. You're good for 24 hours rest after the mission. Typically, you're supposed to have much more time off, but Charlie Platoon was lacking manpower, so they ended up sending us back on another mission. I ended up going back out not even 24 hours later. Now on this mission, I went with Shaka, and this one definitely ended up being a little bit more intense. It was a similar infill situation. We rode out there on the top of a BMP, shitty ass hike in. We were on a different trench position, but in the middle of the night, it all looks the same, at least it did to me. This time we got what was like the penthouse of foxholes, because we got to share a foxhole with the actual Ukrainian commander who was on that mission, whose name was Thor. This like 6 foot something older Ukrainian dude. He had this like badass dangly earring, handsome guy. I mean, he just looked like a war hero, like out of a movie, pretty badass. But we got to share his foxhole, which was very deep and nice. We had some trench candles. It was like a 5-star hotel compared to that first foxhole I was in. Things were pretty chill. The reason Shaka and I went out together is because him and I could just joke back and forth in the most dire situation, and we can make light of it. And so time seemed to fly by, even though this ended up being a 48-hour mission rather than a 24-hour mission. But about halfway through in the morning of the following day, we were told that there were some Russians kind of pushing our direction, or at least around the flank. We were told to fire some 40 mic and rifle mounted grenades over in that direction. So Shaka and I and Thor, the Ukrainian commander, and his second IC, this guy here, took turns firing grenades over at the enemy, and they would fire their grenades back over at us. So we would boom and then run back into our foxhole, and then they would fire. And then we'd come back out and boom, and it was like cat and mouse, like fucking whack-a-mole game, dude. It was ridiculous. At one point in that mission, I was told to go over to another trench, another foxhole, to hold that position while Shaka and Thor held our penthouse of a trench. So I went over, and over the radio, I heard that one of the other Legionnaires that came with us on that mission, we knew that there was a drone in the sky, an enemy drone. And that enemy drone dropped a frag grenade directly on his position. It landed on the top of his foxhole and exploded. Somehow, I have no idea how, but the Legionnaire was unscathed. Did not get injured at all. Lucky bastard. I don't know how that happened. Finally, our 48 hours was coming up. It was time to exfil. We're all getting out of our trenches, getting in a line. We're going to hike out back to the BMP, which actually ended up being a big like cargo truck this time, bigger wheels. It was able to come a little bit further out in the mud, so we didn't have to hike out as much. But we ended up taking a different direction back, which is always sketchy because there's minefields everywhere, but Thor knew the way. He knew there were no mines in this direction, even though there were blown up vehicles all around where we were going. Basically, I was just making sure my footsteps were right in line with the guy in front of me. Eventually we get to the truck, and this is a big ass truck, right? Like the back of it is right here. You got to pull yourself up, get into the truck, and there's 2 rows of benches like this in the back of the truck. So I'm trying to get up, and you know, it's pitch black, and I'm using somebody's leg that's already up there, and I'm pulling myself up, and I get up on top, and I realize this guy's laying down, face down on the back of the truck in between the 2 benches. I realized he was dead. Like, oh shit. It's like, what happened to this guy? And it was a kid, man. He couldn't have been older than 18, if he was even 18. I looked over at Thor, I'm like, the commander, I'm like, what? And he said, landmine. Shaka and I, you know, we scoot in on our bench, and we have to, this dead kid's right underneath us. And so our legs are up, kind of making a bridge over this kid, because of course you're not going to put your feet on a dead soldier. And we're heading out of there, and we're smoking, and we're laughing because we survived the mission. We're getting out of there. We're taking enemy incoming while we were leaving. You could actually see, you could look out the front windshield of the truck, and you could see where the mortar rounds were landing on the either side of the road we were driving on. And it was a surreal moment. Like, we're smoking, you see the enemy mortar fire. There's a dead kid underneath us. We're laughing. I mean, I still think about it, how numb we were to the circumstances that we were in. And I know it sounds super morbid, right? I mean, we're laughing with this fallen soldier underneath us. There ended up being 2 of them. I didn't see the last one until we were getting out of the truck. But using humor is so important to keep your head on straight while you're out there. And of course, there was no humor, there was no jokes or anything directed at these fallen soldiers. Nothing but respect to these guys. And when we got out of that truck, we made sure we came up to Thor, hey, where can we help take the KIA? You know, we'll do it, whatever we got to do. And nothing but respect, always. But the humor was important to make sure that it didn't eat you alive, because you still got to go on more missions. You know, you're still out here on the front line. You got to keep your head on straight. So we get back from our mission. You know, we're getting all our gear off and stuff. Actually, this picture's from right after our mission. There's me and Shaka right there. We get back, and we're getting our gear off and stuff. And all the guys who were, you know, back at the houses while we were out on mission were very quiet. And we got pulled aside and said, hey, our platoon commander, not Dentist was not promoted yet. So it wasn't Dentist, but it was our other platoon commander. He was killed in the garden of his house in our safe village while we were out on mission. We're like, what the fuck? How? Like, how's that possible? Granted, the village would take fire every day from either aircraft or longer range artillery, missiles. So there would still be fire, but it was very inaccurate, and very rarely were there any casualties or KIAs. But apparently what happened was our platoon commander came out of his house. He was in the garden. There was a drone already above him that dropped a grenade right as he was in his garden. It dropped near him, piece of shrapnel ripped straight through his throat, and he bled out in less than 30 seconds. Just like that, our platoon commander is gone. Charlie's platoon commander is gone. Field promotion, now Dentist is platoon commander. Now, I had only been on a few missions while I was out there when I started realizing a few things. This is the part I wanted to talk about. It's going to be a little controversial, but I think it's extremely important that you know. What I noticed, and what ended up being one of the main reasons why I left, is number one, the fact that everybody's got an expiration date on them out there. There's always indirect enemy fire. It's just a numbers game. It's just a matter of time until one of them connects with you. Will that be a fatal hit or just wound you? I don't know, but it's just a matter of time until you get hit. So there was that aspect, but also the substance abuse aspect that I realized. I didn't notice it at first, but then I started seeing some Ukrainian soldiers, again, no disrespect to those guys, when they've been in a war like this for as long as they had been, I don't blame them for doing what they were doing. But I did notice before missions, sometimes we'd meet up with the Ukrainian brigade and I would smell alcohol or beer on them. There were other times that I actually saw that they were using drugs. I have to be so careful with the way I portray this because I don't want there to be a negative light on the Ukrainian soldiers. It's not at all what this is about. This is about informing you to make a smart, educated decision before you go. Substance abuse is an issue out there. And aside from the massive bleeds that I mentioned, which is the number one killer, second or third cause of death is substance abuse. People drinking so much, they just don't wake up because it's so cold out there, they just freeze. We actually had a guy on one mission walk out into a minefield. He was going to pee. He was drunk. He walked out the wrong direction into a minefield. Now, as much as the substances were an issue with the Ukrainian troops, with some of the Ukrainian troops, it was also the same in the Legion. A lot of Legionnaires who didn't have their addictions and stuff in check before they came got wrapped right back into it, whether it was drugs or alcohol, but they were back using. And because of some of these substances, there were some negligent discharges that were happening on mission. There was some friendly fire that would happen on mission, or even back in the village. I started realizing the longer I was out there that I wasn't going to make it home. And not because the Russians got me, but because of some negligent friendly fire substance issue that happened. So after a couple days, I was talking to techs, I was talking to dentists. I decided, hey, I'm calling it, man. This is where I go. I love you guys, but this is it. I was only out there for a handful of months, and that's why I give so much praise and respect to the guys who were out there for longer. But even if you're out there for a couple of weeks, the fact that you had the balls to go, I respect it. But I will encourage you to follow your gut, and here's why. Here's my experience. I decided to leave and go home. You remember earlier I was telling you that I was sharing a house with Cole and Kyle, the medic and the second IC. A week after I got home, I was still, I'm back in Texas. I'm shaving off my crazy beard and, getting a shower every day again. I get a text that Cole and Kyle were KIA. A few days after I left, a handful of guys went up to Bakhmut to help support the defense. Dentist, our commander, Cole and Kyle, and a few others went. While they were on mission, they took heavy enemy fire. Cole was hit by a mortar. Cole was killed on impact. He actually was buried by a bunch of rubble that the mortar threw up. Kyle, being the medic and Cole's best friend and also fellow Canadian, ran over to help start digging him out, get him out. They were taking so much heavy fire. Dentist said the last thing that he saw was Kyle digging out Cole from the rubble, flipping off the other side, screaming, "Fuck you," when the last mortar hit, killed Kyle. Now, these were the two guys I was living with on the front line, and I decided to go home a week before. Trust your gut while you're out there. It will save your life. Fast forward a few months later, most of the guys I went to Charlie with were back home. A lot of them rotate home, get back in shape, get fed, get clean, get more gear, and they'll go back out. So most of the guys were gone from Ukraine. Dentist was still out there, our commander. Dentist was on a CASD-back team on a mission. When some guys were injured, he was on the ATV. He went out to pick them up. He was actually able to get the injured person, the injured soldier, onto the ATV. As they were coming back, the ATV was hit by a mortar. Dentist and the wounded soldier were both killed. So I'll reiterate this one more time. Everybody out there and you're fighting for Ukraine, at least infantrymen, probably more, you have an expiration date. Know that if you go. Know that there are substances out there that can make situations a little bit stickier, a little bit sketchier than they need to be. Be aware of that when you get there. Keep an eye out and choose your fire teams and choose your battle buddies carefully. Watch for these things, man. They could end up being the difference between life or death. So I want to end this video. I know it was a longer one, but I want to end this dedicating it to Dentist, Cole, and Kyle. Phenomenal soldiers, great people to meet. I'm grateful I had the pleasure to meet them. Rest in peace, guys. I'll have more content up soon. Love you.